Penny here, and today I'm going to be talking about the top 10 fantasy books that I read in 2020. Now, I did already do a book battle of my champions of the month, the best books that I read each month, and some of these books were in that. However, there were also some other really great fantasies that I read during the year that didn't make it into that video, and I still wanted an excuse to talk about them, so this is that excuse. So I have a rating spreadsheet where I rate books against 5 different criteria and then I average that rating up. And these are the 10 books that got the highest ratings, and I'm going to go from the one with the lowest rating to the highest. Although the one with the lowest rating got 4.29, which is already pretty high. Although sadly I don't actually own number 10. I'm going to hold this one up as an excuse because this is the first book in the trilogy that Ship of Destiny is from. So Ship of Destiny is the third book in the Live Ship Traders, which is the second trilogy in the Realm of the Elderling series by Robin Hobb. I started reading this series in 2019. I read the first trilogy and the first half of the Live Ship Traders, and then I finished off reading Ship of Destiny in 2020 and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a really great way to wrap up the series. So if you haven't heard of this series, we basically have these live ships, which are ships where once they've been owned for 3 generations of a family, they then kind of gain a soul and a personality and become alive. So we're following this one particular family whose patriarch is about to die, and when that happens, the ship will come alive. And there's several different people within that family who think that they are going to inherit this live ship. Some of them with not so great plans for what they're going to do with the live ship. We also have a pirate who wants to become a pirate king and has plans to kidnap or steal a live ship. And there's also a bunch of different characters that we follow, and although in the first book some of them I wasn't that invested in, by the last book I really cared about all the different perspectives, and the way they were coming together was really interesting and kind of heart-wrenching because you knew that not everyone was going to get what they wanted, and we had some really heartbreaking revelations, some scenes that were just so hard to read. The series really came together in Ship of Destiny, and I'm excited soon to be reading the Rainwell Chronicles, which I believe is going to have some more of the characters from this series in it. I also don't own number 9 on this list, but this is a series I would really like to have on my shelves. Pretty much all my favorite books, I would like to own them, but sadly I don't quite have a few of these. But number 9 is Storm of Locust by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this is the second book in the Sixth World series, where we followed this girl named Mags, who is a Native American, and this is an apocalyptic type world, and I guess the reservation that these people lived in have been quite separated from the rest of the world, where there's floods and awful things going on, but there's still awful things happening in this area as well. And Mags is essentially a monster hunter, and I just really like her attitude as well as her romantic interest. And in this third book she ends up joining up with a couple of other characters to take them along on this, I guess, should we call it a quest? Let's call it a quest. Mags also has these different magical abilities, one from each side of her family's ancestry, but because one of these abilities is essentially being really good at killing, she's regularly questioning whether she's just a monster hunter or whether she is in fact a monster herself. And I really like that aspect of her character. I really love the writing style. It's very fast-paced and action-packed. The world is really interesting, the way it brings in Native American mythology, and I'm really interested to see what will happen next in this series. Then at number 8 we have Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. So this is the first book in the Dreamers trilogy. I think it's a trilogy, which is a spin-off series from the Raven Boys. So in the Raven Boys we have these 4 private school boys as well as this girl named Blue. In this new series we're following Ronan, and it's very hard to talk about this series without slightly spoiling the Raven Boys, but basically we're following a bunch of different people who have dream-related magic going on. In this series I can see that Maggie Stiefvater is kind of taking it to another level in terms of weirdness, and she's really developing a very distinctive writing style, which I really enjoy. I do think it's not going to be for everyone. It is very strange. The characters are all very unusual. There is actually a second point of view character in this series, and again it's hard to talk about how amazing she is without spoilers, but she's essentially an art thief or an art forger, and she's also related to this dream magic. She's trying to save her sister as well as find her own identity, and I love her so much. I cannot wait again to continue this series. Okay, then number 7 is The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the final book in the Broken Earth trilogy, and I will say this is a very intense trilogy. There's a lot of really traumatic stuff going on, but it's all done in a way that's really helping you to feel what's going on with the different themes that it's exploring. So it's set in a post-apocalyptic world where the world is actually having like regular apocalypses, and people are always expecting the next apocalypse. We've also got these people with the power of orogeny who are able to control the earth, help to stop earthquakes or potentially cause earthquakes. And in this final book we learned a lot more about those powers and where they came from and how it came to be that people with these powers were so enslaved and treated so badly. I felt like I learned so much from this book and I really enjoyed it. I do think that if you read this you should expect that the characters go through some really traumatic things, so be prepared for that. But I really like this series. I will also say about half of this book is written in second person, which is where it refers to the character as you. I know a lot of people don't like that, but I think it fit really well in this book. There is also kind of like a third perspective, which almost uses we as a pronoun, or at least in the beginning. And I also found that really interesting, but again, not going to be for everyone. These different perspectives aren't just like for fun. They really do play into the way that the story is being told, which I really enjoyed. Personally, I'm kind of sad that this series is finished and that I don't get any more in this world, but at the same time it did wrap things up really well, so I suppose I'll live and I can always reread it. Then at number 6 we have The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. I really don't even know what genre this is, but there are some elements that you could definitely call fantastical, so we're going to include it in the top fantasy books that I read. Primarily we're following this guy who has taken some time off from work to try and figure out what he would like to do with his life. But at the same time his cat goes missing, and in trying to track down his cat he meets a lot of very strange people, and then his wife also goes missing and those same people are involved in him trying to track her down. It's very strange and very weird. There's lots of things that don't seem directly related to the plot, but they do kind of link into that overall theme of trying to find yourself, and I feel like it's the kind of book that I could read again and again and still it would leave me thinking about these things. As well, I listened to the audiobook and I have to say the audiobook narrator was amazing. This is probably the best audiobook that I read all year, and so I know a lot of people would like to try Haruki Murakami, but they find his books to be somewhat intimidating because they are quite long. So if that's you, I would really recommend that you try the audiobook. And I will definitely be reading more Haruki Murakami via audiobook this year. Then at number 5 we have Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Please ignore the fact that my copy is from a little free library and it is very rough. I did actually listen to the audiobook, but I couldn't resist getting a physical copy of this for free, so I got it. I still need to try and maybe make some repairs to it. So in this story we have magic, which is color based and also breath based. Everybody is born with one breath, but you're able to give your breaths up to others, and people who have a lot of breaths gain a greater perception of the world and also this ability to use color-based magic. I do think of all of Brandon Sanderson's magic systems, this is the one that I have found the most complicated and confusing. I have seen people saying that this is a good place to start with fantasy, and while there are some aspects of this that I agree with that on, I think the magic system is possibly too confusing to be a good place to start. But maybe that's just me being dumb, who knows. I did think this was a really funny book. One of our main characters is a god, or at least people treat him as a god. There are these people that have come back from the dead and people give up their breaths to them, so they have a lot of breaths, making them essentially godlike. But this one god that we're following doesn't really believe that he's a god, even though people are worshipping him, and a lot of the things he says are just really funny and also I thought quite thought-provoking. We're also following these two princesses from a neighboring kingdom. One of them was always prepared that she was going to be sent to this neighboring kingdom that uses this magic in order to marry the god king who has the most breaths of anyone, but at the last minute the king decides that he doesn't want to send his favorite daughter to marry her, so instead he he sends his least favorite daughter, who is completely unprepared. And it was really interesting following both their perspectives as well and seeing how different they were perceiving things. And also my most favorite part of this book is this sword that basically has been made to want to kill evil things, but he doesn't really know what evil things are necessarily. But when somebody owns him or holds him, he will talk in their head. And the way that he speaks is just hilarious. I've said before, I think Brandon Sanderson has a special skill in writing inanimate objects, and I really enjoyed it. And I will also say the sword from this book does show up in the Stormlight Archives, so I think you should read this before you read the Stormlight Archives to really appreciate that when it comes up in the Stormlight Archives. And I don't know when Brandon Sanderson will ever get to it, but there is talk of there being another book that seems like it would follow that sword. So fingers crossed that we will get that at some point. Then at number 4, I'm grouping a few books together because they were sort of in the same place on the list, and that is the Tawny Man trilogy by Robin Hobb. So this is the next trilogy after The Lifeship Traders, and in this one we're back with the main character from the first trilogy, Fitz. In that first trilogy he went from being quite a young boy to kind of a young adult and learning to be an assassin, finding his place in the royal court and trying to survive a whole bunch of political intrigue. In this one he's older, more like 40-ish, which is something I can relate a little bit more to, so I did really enjoy it. I love just being back with Fitz and having him end up in more and more difficult situations. In this one he basically gets pulled back into court trying to help train up the next generation in the different kinds of magic, and I guess just in political thinking. And eventually in this third book they end up going on a quest to try and kill a dragon, which definitely doesn't go as planned, because when does anything that Fitz wants to do ever go to plan? Never. But I was just so happy to be back with these characters, back in this world. I really loved everything that happened in it. And honestly, I don't even know. There's something about this series and the way that Robin Hobb writes that just feels like it's really happening. And so for me, it makes me really interested to see what's going to happen next, because it feels so real and I care about all the characters so much. I also really like the way it looks at kind of different family dynamics. And you could also say that some of the way that people treat people with certain kinds of magic in this series is looking a lot at racism and prejudice, and I liked some of that stuff as well. Then at number 3 I have All the Crooked Saints by Maggie Stiefvater. So yes, the second Maggie Stiefvater book on this list. This is a standalone though, not part of a series, and this is about this family of saints that people come to get help dealing with the darkness inside them. However, the way that they help them means that the darkness inside them gets manifested in the real world in a physical way, and then these pilgrims end up staying with this family until they can overcome that darkness. And so there's more and more of these pilgrims staying with the family. We follow several different characters within this family and pilgrims that have come to the family, and every single one has a really interesting story. I also just really liked what this book had to say about facing the darkness inside you rather than denying it. And I just loved how super weird some of the ideas in it were. And there's bits in the writing where it would like really over exaggerate things. But because the book was really strange, you would be like, are these exaggerations real, or is this just part of the writing style? And who really knows? But I thought it was really beautifully written, and I really liked some of the points that it's making. And for me, it had an emotional impact, and so that's why it's one of my favorite books. Then at number 2, we have Wizard of the Pigeons by Megan Lindholm, which is actually Robin Hobb. So this is, yes, the third one on the list by Robin Hobb, but it's by Megan Lindholm, so we'll pretend it's a whole new author. This is more of a modern urban fantasy style book, so it's still written in the very magical way that Robin Hobb writes things, but it's set in Seattle, I think, and the way that it's written, given that it's talking about everyday things in the beginning, was amazing. We're following this man named Wizard, who is a homeless man living on the street, and he has a bunch of rules that he's set for himself, and he believes that if he doesn't follow these rules he will lose his magic, which is where he's able to see the truth of things and tell people those truths. He also has these other friends who are also some kind of wizards, one of them being this woman named Cassie, who always looks different. The great thing about this book is you're never really sure, is he actually a wizard or is he just a homeless man who believes himself to be a wizard? Is Cassie even a real person. And then there are parts of the books where he actually stops believing he's a wizard and he believes he's just a homeless war veteran. And those parts are almost the most heartbreaking bits. And really, I just think this is a really beautiful book about the power of believing in magic and believing in yourself. And even though I don't own it, it's another one that I really would love to own because I would love to get more people to read this one. I only read this book because the library selected it for me in my Ready to Go Reads reading project. So shout out to the library. I think I probably would have read this eventually, but I'm glad that I read it in 2020 because it was definitely one of my favorite books of the year. And in fact, the book that is number 1 on this list was a reread, so Wizard of the Pigeons was my favorite new fantasy read of 2020. Oh, and also, looking at my spreadsheet right now, I can see that these both got 4.71, so really, they're tied for first place. So, the one that I'm saying is number 1 anyway is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. So yes, another Brandon Sanderson. I've been reading more and more of his stuff. I do really like it. I think he's a really great writer, and the way he thinks about plot and characters is really interesting. This is actually his first published work, and a lot of people say that it is weaker than his other stuff, and that might be true, but I still think this is a really good read. There are some bits at the end that maybe don't pull off like he was planning, but still, it's a really enjoyable story. It's kind of a fantasy zombie novel. That's what he was thinking of when he created this idea. So we have this city of Elantris. It used to be a beautiful city full of these shining godlike people, and every now and then people would wake up to have become these shining godlike people, and they would go to Elantris and help people using the magic of Elantris. Then one day the city of Elantris is essentially cursed. It starts to rot. The people turn from being these beautiful godlike people to being kind of blotchy and rotted. And so they basically quarantine off the city of Elantris and anybody who wakes up with what they call the Shaod. I think that's how you say it. Those people get thrown into the city and quarantined there. So we're following a man who gets thrown into the city. We're also following a princess from a neighboring kingdom who has come to marry the prince, but things aren't going to plan for her. And as well, we follow this religious figure who has been told that if he doesn't convert the people of the city to believe in their religion within the next 4 months, then the people of the city are going to be killed. So he's trying to convert them to this new religion. And part of how he's planning to do that involves the city of Elantris. I really like all the characters. I love the way their plot lines came together and the way they kind of cause problems for each other. I love learning more about the magic. And I really hope that one day we will get more books with these characters and set in this world. I think Brandon Sanderson does eventually have plans to come back to it, but let's be honest, Brandon Sanderson has a lot of plans and only so much life. So let's hope that maybe we can make people live forever so that 1, we have enough time for him to finish writing all the books he wants to write, and 2, we all have enough time to read them. Anyway, those are the top 10 fantasy books that I read in 2020. Let me know if you've read any of them and if you have, what you thought about them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.